Hello, I'm here today to help orient you to the beginnings of cell structure and function. When we start thinking about biological organisms, maybe I'm interested in plant structure, maybe I'm interested in animal structure, maybe I'm interested in understanding bacteria better. The fundamental building blocks of all of these living systems are cells. So if I know something about how a cell is put together and how it works, I know something about every living creature on the planet. That's going to be useful to us. So let's start by making an imaginary division between all life. We're going to divide all life into one of two forms. They are either made of prokaryotic cells. These are bacteria, things like E. coli, good bacteria, bad bacteria, and everything in between. Prokaryotic cells, and those living things made of eukaryotic cells like you and I. I won't go into too much detail in prokaryotic cells today, besides emphasizing that they are much, much smaller than eukaryotic cells and lack the distinctive nucleus as well as any membrane-bound organelles that we'll find in more complex eukaryotic cells. We'll look at some prokaryotic cells in lab to contrast them to a typical eukaryotic cell. Today what I want to do with you is help distinguish between two categories of eukaryotic cells, plant cells and animal cells. And I'll start by emphasizing things that both cell types have in common. Because these are both eukaryotic cells, most of their structure and function is actually remarkably similar. For example, in both of these cells, you'll find the outer surface of the cell, the outer functional surface, defined by a plasma membrane made of phospholipids. This structure will be the same for all cells we look at, including prokaryotic cells, and will be made, the membranes we find inside the cells will also be made of these phospholipids. So that's a useful piece to understand. It'll help guide us through these eukaryotic cells. So all of these cells have a cell membrane. It protects the cell, and importantly, it helps regulate what kinds of things can move in and out of a cell. And we'll see lots of examples of that as we move forward this quarter. In addition to a cell membrane shared by both of these, by all living cells really, what defines a eukaryotic cell in particular is the presence of the nucleus, usually towards the center of the cell, but not always. So I've got a sample animal cell here. This conspicuous structure in the middle is the nucleus. It's a membrane-bound compartment, so it's got a phospholipid bilayer surrounding and protecting it that houses and stores the DNA. I can find a very, very similar structure in any plant cell as well, a nucleus that houses and protects the DNA. In addition, both of these cell types need a lot of energy to keep themselves functional. To get this energy, they're going to use a specialized structure called a mitochondria. The mitochondria are the energy factories, the power plants of the cell. And again, we find them in both plant and animal cells, as well as almost all other eukaryotic cells. These are organelles, small membrane-bound structures inside a cell that break down the sugars and other foods we eat to make energy to keep our cells up and running. So those are shared between plant and animal cells. Another feature that's shared between both plant, animal, and prokaryotic cells are the ribosomes. Ribosomes are very, very small. I can't really show you them on my models, but these are very important structures that take the directions encoded in your DNA and use them to make the proteins that provide most of the enzymes and structures we need for the cell. So we'll definitely be thinking a lot about how ribosomes do this, how they interface with the DNA as we move forward. That'll be a big help in our understanding of basic genetics as well. So that's shared between these two. Another key feature that's shared between plant and animal cells is the presence of a structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. For good reason, you'll often hear this abbreviated as the ER. The ER is just a flattened sac of membranes, so a lot of fine folded phospholipid bilayers, plasma membranes here, folded over. It's easy to find in the cell because it's physically connected to the nucleus. If you can find the nucleus, you can find the endoplasmic reticulum of the cell. Cells are going to use this as a manufacturing center. They're making all sorts of important compounds in this unique structure with all of its surface area. You'll find two types of ER in a cell, plant or animal: smooth ER and rough ER, well named because the rough ER looks rough under an electron microscope. It's rough because it's studded with ribosomes, covered in ribosomes. So if you know that ribosomes assemble proteins, you know that the cell is building its proteins in the rough ER. Another membrane-bound structure found in eukaryotic cells is the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus is also just a set of connected, flattened sacs of phospholipid bilayer membrane. It is not attached to the nucleus, but floats freely in the cytoplasm away from the ER. This is sort of a shipping and receiving center for the cell. As the cell manufactures lipids, proteins, other important molecules, it's going to package them up in tiny membrane-bound packages called vesicles and send them to the Golgi. In the Golgi, they might get modified, labeled, made ready for whatever their job is in the cell. So shipping and receiving in our Golgi apparatus. So those are some highlights for you, the similarities between plant and animal cells, between all eukaryotic cells. We would also put things like fungi in this category, and many of the unicellular organisms like the paramecium and the amoeba that you might have seen in pond water earlier this quarter. So those are eukaryotic cells and structures shared by all of them. In addition, we're going to make a bit of a distinction now between plant cells and animal cells. When I'm thinking about a plant, there are some unique features to a plant cell as compared to an animal cell. And this model might give you a good idea of it, and you might know this yourself. Plant cells are encased in a very thick cell wall. It is in fact just these dead, thickened cell walls that make up the wood of a tree trunk. That's how rigid and thick and protective these plant cell walls can be. We'll be back later this quarter to think about how these provide an extra layer of protection. For now, know that plant cells have both a plasma membrane and a nice, thick, regular cell wall on top, on the outside of that plasma membrane. In addition, in plant cells, many plant cells, you're going to find chloroplasts. Right? Plants are doing photosynthesis, taking solar energy and carbon dioxide and building sugars for their energy supply. This process takes place in specialized organelles or small membrane-bound compartments inside this cell I'll call chloroplasts. And again, we'll be back later to look at the chemistry of that and how that really important process functions. So those are some unique features, chloroplasts and the cell wall, that we associate more with with plant cells. Animal cells, in contrast, have a couple of unique features that we don't find in plant cells. They also have a protective coating on the top of their cell membrane. Remember, that cell membrane is a very soft, fluid, fragile structure. So we layer the top of our cell membranes with what's called an extracellular matrix. Extra just meaning it's outside. So this cellular matrix is going to provide us with extra elasticity and protection. So there you have it for now, some fundamental differences between plant and animal cells. But remember, really they have more in common than not. So we'll be back next time to start thinking about how all these structures are going to give us a functional entity, a cell that's alive. We'll look at the chemistry, we'll think a little bit about the energy that's involved, the enzymes that are needed to keep this up and running as we build our solid foundation for understanding biology. See you next time.